All right. Welcome back to the Forfeit Fatherhood podcast, a podcast for fathers by fathers, where we talk about the four pillars of fatherhood, which are faith, family, finance, and fitness. And I'm excited to have this particular guest on because he's nowhere near me. Usually I get guests on and they're relatively close, but this is like the other side of the world. So I'm super excited for the guest today, and I think you guys are going to get some really, really good information from him. I'm excited for you guys to hear about his story and some of the things that he's doing. Our guest today is Sebastian Bates. Sebastian, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. How you doing?
Hey Rod, good morning or good evening where you are. Like we said when we started this, we're just two guys shooting the breeze across the pond.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a pleasure to be invited on. I've seen your content online and just fully aligned with so much of what you say. I think a lot of dads would agree with it. The majority of the stuff you're saying must fully align with them, just like me. So yeah, pleasure to be on. Um, Very brief intro to me, if you like. My name is Sebastian Bates. I live here in Dubai with my two kids, 3 and 6, boy and a girl. I run a martial arts organization called the Warrior Academy. Over the last 12, 13 years, I've worked with over 30,000 children. We're currently based across 3 continents. We are the largest martial arts academy in the UAE, which is where I live in Dubai. I've written 2 best-selling books, one on character development and one on anti-bullying. And our whole mission and vision really is to transform young lives through character development, to build resilient young people so they can go on to live a happy and successful life in the future. And alongside the Warrior Academy, I have the Bates Foundation, which sponsors over 2,000 orphans in developing countries to develop their character through martial arts. So that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, not a lot at all. Just doing a few things.
No.
Man, that is an impressive list of things that you got going on there, man. I have to ask, how did you get into the Warrior Academy? Like, what kind of drew you into doing that and doing that kind of work?
Yeah, so I grew up in the countryside of England, and then we moved around a lot. My dad was in the army; he was in the Marines and the Paras, so we moved around a lot, as you do as a kind of army brat kid. Four kids in the family. It's a fairly big family. Um, I grew up and I was in the Royal Marines for a while, and then I left to study architecture in Denmark. Um, I was going to be an architect, right? And then I remember a year into the course where I was just washing dishes every day to save money for the rent and studying sort of 8 to 10 hours every single day. I basically got fed up with life and I wanted more adventure. And so I bought a one-way ticket to India. And while I was in India, I was trying to pick up work and creating different ways of generating income while I was traveling around, right? So I would sleep on sleeper trains at night. I would go to hotels and bring tourists to the hotels to then stay for an extra week. And I was doing that around Southeast Asia as well. Eventually, I found myself on a Thai boxing camp. And I'd already had about 15 years experience at that point in Taekwondo. And I was a national champion in Taekwondo as a young person. But that's where I fell in love with Thai boxing. It's obviously a very full contact, brutal martial art, but it taught me so much. And when I came back to the UK, because eventually I had to come back, I couldn't carry on this unsustainable way of living forever. Eventually, I came back to the UK, and I wanted to do something physical. I didn't want to be, doing an office job, and so I started to be a personal trainer. And my first gig as a personal trainer was teaching Thai boxing in a rundown inner city gym. And so there I was walking into this inner city gym, and there were 20, 16 to 18-year-old young men. And they were coming from very difficult backgrounds. A lot of them were, struggling with substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, domestic violence at home. They were struggling with relationships. They were struggling with basically making the right decisions. They kept on making the wrong decisions in their lives. And so when they came to this Thai boxing club, they just wanted to fight. This was just a testosterone-filled room with young men who just wanted to let off steam. And when I first took it over, I remember teaching them that they had to bow when they entered the room, and they had to shake hands. They had to park their shoes off, and before they were just kind of kicking them off. And it was fascinating to me to see the change we made within them from within a year. Within a year, we had these young people giving up alcohol, giving up drugs, living a clean, healthy lifestyle, making better decisions, not sleeping rough, getting on with their parents. And we had 15 national champions within 12 months. These guys were already fit, physical young men, right? So all I needed to do was go in and change the character. And so what I realized was the big transformation we made wasn't about martial arts. It was about using martial arts for something they enjoyed and they could follow, but really planting the seeds of what we call a black belt character. And then I realized, well, if only I had found these guys 10 years earlier, then I would be in a position where I could transform their lives, right? If I could find them at 4 to 6 to 9 years old, we could plant the seeds of a black belt character, and it would go on to change those little decisions they made, which would then compound over time. And so that's what I did. I then started the Warrior Academy, which was a club for young children, and it started in a little village school. There was 100 kids in the whole school, and we had 20% of all the students in the whole school signing up. We had 20 kids in the first class, and from there it grew. Within a few years, we had 500 children around the southwest of England. That then escalated to us wanting to expand somewhere urban. And so on a trip to Dubai, I realized, why don't I just launch here? Which is what I did. And within a few years of being in the UAE, we became the largest martial arts organization in the UAE. We've got about 9 offices across the country here. We've got about 1,500 students who train with us every single week. And that then led me on to developing, our scholarship academies and the stuff we now do around the world as well. So that's basically where the Warrior Academy started.
Man, that's an awesome story. It in America, and this is not always, right? But typically when a guy's in college and he's like, yeah, I'm not really feeling this college thing. He doesn't buy a ticket to go to India. He just drops out and he goes and hangs out on mom and dad's couch. So you're you're already doing this thing way different than the typical college student in America for sure. Yeah. But you mentioned something in there that I thought it just kind of resonated with, because we're dads and talking about kids or whatnot. My daughters both did Taekwondo for a little while, because I used to train a guy named Peter Lopez who represented Peru in the Olympics a couple of Olympics. And so they did Taekwondo with him, and I remember him talking about black belt character, and they used to have black belt character when they were doing it, and just stuff. It was really cool to see the few, they'd be in a class for like an hour and they'd talk about it, but then you could see them come home and they would practice it. So,
Right.
the way that they conducted themselves at home was like, would a black belt do that? You'd hear them say it like, is that black belt character?
Yeah.
Are we being honest? And some of the different things that he was teaching them, and just like an hour, like, maybe once or twice a week. And then it just carried over into how they presented themselves at home. And I think that was really, it's really cool to see how that transfers over. So when you mentioned it, it rang a bell for me, and I was like, oh yeah. They ended up stopping because they didn't like to. Yeah, they didn't like to kick people.
But
they got.
But you know what?
They got to the.
It's bringing the lessons, right? It's bringing the lessons from the dojo to the home, and that's the key, which most martial arts organizations don't crack that, right? The classes are great, but how do they transition those lessons, the character lessons, to the home? I love what you said about, how does a black belt behave? Does a black belt do this? Does a black belt do that? Because really, when we call it the black belt journey, because when a student signs up to us and they earn their uniform, they don't just get the uniform, they have to do a series of behavior challenges at home. When they earn the uniform, they put it on for the first time. It's like they take on this identity, right? And especially young kids, they've got this incredible imagination. I was in Nairobi last year in a homeless shelter with 30 homeless boys. They were street kids, and they typically spent the last 3 or 4 years on the street. Again, it's kind of full circle, because these kids were struggling with substance abuse and all this sort of stuff, sleeping rough. And for me, it was like, wow, it's just like when I first started. Some of the kids I was, the older boys I was working with, right? But now I'm with 8 to 9 year olds in Nairobi in a homeless shelter. And this is our first Bates Foundation Warrior Academy scholarship academy, if you like, where we were providing them with tuition. And I remember giving one of the boys, he's covered in scratches and burns and scars, and he's had a traumatic life. But I gave him this uniform because he performed so well in the class, right? And this was his probably his only, set of clothes outside of what he was wearing that he owned. And I remember when he first put it on, it was just incredible to see the change in his eyes. He was like, I'm now a martial artist, right? It was like, I'm now going to become a black belt. And the beautiful thing about that, I think, is, you're not just giving someone martial arts classes, you're giving them an identity, you're giving them something to live up to, something to strive for. In the Warrior Academy, we call it a moonshot, right? You're basically planting a moonshot in the young person's mind, which is to become a black belt. But obviously, as parents, we know it's not really about the black belt. That's just a piece of material. It's the striving to become the person who could have a black belt, which changes their character. In the same way, JF Kennedy, when he does the speech about the moonshot, he talks about, what's the point of going to the moon? Well, it's about changing who we are and having the discipline to become a society who could send someone to the moon. And I love that because it's kind of similar to parenting, right?
Yeah, it's definitely like it's not the being a black belt, it's the becoming a black belt, right? It's the journey that takes you
Yeah.
from where you start to where you hope to achieve, but along the way it's what it's all about, right? The process and the growth and the maturity and all the things that you learn about yourself and about others is what's most important. If you get the black belt, now obviously that's awesome, right? Like that's phenomenal to become a black belt. But even before you get there, the person you become is so much more like magical than where
Yeah.
you started. Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Totally.
So
And do you know what?
no,
I've,
go
I've
ahead.
met I've met so many martial artists who have incredible competition accolades and they've got black belts and all this sort of stuff, but they're not actually good people. And there's people think that if you sign up to martial arts, you're automatically going to become a better person, but it's not about that, right? Because there's this moral education that I think a lot of martial arts clubs are missing, which is what we focus on so much. And I think ultimately the child wants a black belt, but the parent wants a black belt character. And it's something I keep saying because, what do we really want for our kids? Well, of course, we want them to be able to protect themselves. But more than that, they're not really going to be attacked that often, right? So more than being able to have the level of self-protection, which is important, it's being able to look after themselves from a mental point of view, having a moral compass, right? Having high levels of confidence, conduct, and concentration, what we call the 3 Cs. And I think that's a moral education that we can provide using martial arts as a vehicle.
Yeah, when I was looking at the Warrior Academy website and kind of watching the videos and some of the testimonials and things that people are saying, it is definitely, I think you guys say it's more than punches and kicks, right? It was definitely very clear that that is obviously a part of it. Like you mentioned, being able to defend yourself is obviously a part of it. It's a martial art. There's got to be some part of it
Yeah.
that involves some physicality, but I think all the other pieces that go around and like I looked at your blog and there's like the topics are like character development and disorders and behavior and school and I mean like this isn't just how to kick. This is not just a roundhouse. This is not
No.
just how you strike and high blocks, low blocks, middle blocks, right? This is like a full developmental program for young people. And I
Yeah.
think
And
that's
do you know what?
something
Do you know
that's
what's really
missing.
Yes, exactly that. And I speak to parents a lot about this, and I'm like, well, if there was a better way of developing character than martial arts, I'd be doing that instead. If I honestly thought there was a better way out, a better vehicle out there of developing character, martial arts is great, but developing character, now that's incredible, right? And when I speak to my instructors, I say to them, look, the true legacy of your work isn't what goes on in the dojo. It's what the students go and do when they leave. And kind of one of the beautiful things about serving society, serving a community, serving mankind, I think, is putting your heart and soul and passion and years into something, never truly seeing the fruits of your labor because they go on in a decade's time, right? It's like you plant the seeds of a black belt character. How does that shape a child's life in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years when they're going through something difficult, traumatic? How do they approach adversity and they reflect back on their own instructor's words in the dojo? And I look back at the things that my instructor taught me, and he was a fantastic instructor. And I learned so much from that, right? It helped me transition through bullying. I had a life-changing accident where I had a base jump and I broke everything from my waist down after falling 50 foot from a parachute. and I had to learn to walk again. It took me 2 years. I was told I could never walk again. And a lot of that resilience comes from the martial arts training I had and all this sort of stuff, right? It's like, well, if you didn't have that, you didn't have that grounding in developing character, how different would your life be? And so for me, it's super inspiring to have the privilege of working with young people doing that.
Yeah. You mentioned something there that parallels with parenting is like, and me and my wife talk about this all the time, is like you you don't know like the things that you're doing right now. Like you're trying to do the best for your kids, right? You're trying to parent them the best way possible, and you're trying to figure out like what is the way that I should do this and do that. But you really don't know like right now. Like right now you feel like you're doing okay, right? But the true test is like when your kids have
Yep.
kids, right? Or when your kids are
Yes.
grandparents, and you can
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
look back on it and be like, oh man, yeah, you know what? I did do a good job. Look at that. Like, you don't know
I
these,
did
like
a
you
good
said, the
job,
seat,
or maybe I shouldn't have done that, or
right? Where you guys are
maybe
you
I should
guys
have
are
been
sit
stricter. Maybe I shouldn't have been as strict.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Do
But
you know what,
you're
Rod? This is one of the things as well. So I mentor a lot of people through bullying, and one of the biggest challenges I've got with bullying is the amount of shame or guilt parents have associated with that, because their kid will go through bullying and they'll be like, "Oh, I should have done this differently, or I should have done that differently, or it's my fault that they've gone through bullying and all this sort of stuff." And I'm like, first of all, you're not born with a guidebook. Most parents are completely winging it. I don't know if that's an American term, winging it. Do you guys
Oh
say
yeah.
that?
Yes, we
Yeah?
do.
Yeah, you say that. It's like, parents come from a place of they have so much love for their kids. They want to do the right thing, but they haven't got a guidebook. So they've got to kind of just figure stuff out as they go along. And so you do the best you can as a parent, I think, without having all the information that you need. But there are certain things we learn as the generations of parents evolve, which I think, you look back and you're like, well, actually, I don't need to do things the same way my parents did, because we've got this new level of education. We understand things differently. And so when I look at things like bullying, I'm like, well, first of all, your child is likely to go through bullying, more likely to go through it than not go through it, right? So as a parent, it's kind of your responsibility to learn about bullying and to learn how to protect your child. And one of the things I always say is, you can't always be there for your child. All you can do is empower them to face life's obstacles on their own, because they've got to go through something like that on their own, right? To
Hmm.
really grow up and evolve, they've got to go through bullying on their own. But it's interesting because a lot of the bullying transcends generations. So an interesting story I have about that is I was working with a confidence coach who was doing some work with us on bullying, and she was like, "Well, I was bullied when I was younger." And I was like, "What were you bullied for?" And she said, "Well, the way I look, and my weight, and this, and the way I dressed, and this sort of stuff." And I was like, "Okay." And I got talking to her. She's like, "Well, yeah, my mum was very strict." I was like, "Okay, what was she strict on?" She was like, "Well, she's very strict on how I looked and how I dressed, and she was strict on my weight." And I said, "Go and speak to your mum and ask her if she was ever bullied, right?" And so
Hmm.
she phones up her mum that week, and she's like, "Mum, were you ever bullied? Did you ever go through bullying?" And she was like, "Yeah, I did." And she said, "Well, what were you bullied for?" She said, "Well, the way I look, how I dressed, my weight," right? And the spooky thing about bullying, as well as any previous trauma that we experience as a young person, is how it follows us like a dark shadow and transcends through generations. And if we
Hmm.
don't have the courage to face up to previous negative, toxic behavior traits or whatever, or previous trauma, then we will pass it on to our kids. And that sent shivers down my spine when I realized that. I was like, as a parent, it's our responsibility to kind of face our own demons in order to be a better parent, right?
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think whatever we don't face in our life, we pass on, right? Like we have saying in football,
Mm.
like if you're not coaching it, you're letting it happen, right? Like if something's going on in
Yeah,
your team and you're not coaching it up, you just kind of give it a pass and you're letting it happen. It'll happen once and it'll happen again. And so I agree. Like if we aren't facing it in ourselves and repairing ourselves, then we just pass that trauma on to the next generation.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the big goal of a parent. I think it's people say to me, and I'm a young parent. I'm 30, 33. I've got a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. I mean, I'm a young parent for Dubai anyway. Back home, there's I've got lots of friends who are much younger with many more kids. But people ask me what's the importance, or what's the key for parenting, and I'm like, well, I think if you want to become a better parent, one of the most important things you can do is work on yourself, right? Because if you can develop yourself as a person and develop your own character as a person, as a parent, then your kids mirror that, right? They get to an age where it's all about copying the parent. Initially, they're very, very young, and you're just in full nurturing mode with them, right? When they're 1, 2, 3, or 4 years old. But after that, I feel like they mimic you, they copy what you're doing. So if it's not just a case of talking about you should do this, you should do that. You've got to act it, right? And so I think that's kind of relieving, isn't it? Like, we don't have a
Yeah.
guidebook on how to parent, so maybe the best way to parent is just becoming a better person ourselves and showing that through our own actions and having our kids copy that.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. I think that may be it. Like, I think you might have figured it all out. Like, right there. Like, you that's it. All parenting, you've got the perfect advice. Is if we work on ourselves and we become better versions of ourselves, whatever title we put on top of that is ultimately better, right? And so if that title is parent, and
Yeah.
we create a better person ourselves, then we're a better parent, or at least we have the potential to be a better parent. And I guess you can make a decision and not choose to be a good parent, be a better person and a bad parent. I don't know if that works together, but maybe it's possible.
Yeah.
But but I think they go hand in hand, right? It's like, as you improve yourself, as you heal from whatever past traumas you have, as you gain more confidence, or you take care of yourself in different ways, I think it sets you up to be better for your children.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And it's one of those things, right? Like you say, you won't know for another 10 years. But ultimately, if you just work on yourself and you're trying and you're facing your previous demons, even if you're not fully successful, your kids are still watching you do that, right? They're still watching you overcome that. And we weren't all born in the same place with the same privileges or the same challenges, And it's a case of we've all got different demons to fight. It doesn't matter who you are or where you are. And I think your kids will always see that, right? If you're a parent and you're struggling with addiction or something like that, and you're working your best against that, and you're doing your best for yourself, I think your children grow up seeing that, and that influences their own life massively. They always
Hmm.
fought to improve themselves, to therefore improve me as a child, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right on, man. I had a question for you though. So for a parent, right? I'm sure somebody on here, like you said, you're probably more likely to a child is probably more likely to be bullied than not be bullied. If I'm someone that has a
Yeah.
child that's being bullied, and I'm trying to figure out how to handle it, and you know what what well, obviously I should probably look into getting into some kind of program, or look at getting some help, right? Instead of me trying to figure it out on my own.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm not there yet though. What advice would you give me? Like, what would you say? What is something that I can maybe do right now to try to help my kid?
Okay. So first of all, I believe that the majority of people will go through bullying. It's a lot of schools say we're a bully-free school. It's just not true. You can't be a bully-free school. I see it here in the UAE and the UK all the time. Maybe you see it in the States too. Sign up to
Hmm.
us. We're a bully-free school. It's impossible, because bullying is just a part of the human condition, an ugly part of the human condition. It's when young people and even adults are trying to they're trying to navigate social dynamics, and it's just classic behavioral psychology. It happens. It's impossible to avoid. And so if we know that it's impossible to avoid, and we know that it's got a huge impact on a person's life, actually both positive and negative, because your character transforms through bullying, right? It can either make or break your character. If we know that's the case, then it's our responsibility as parents to prepare for it. But the problem
Hmm.
is, most parents come to us reacting to the bullying that's just happened. Rather than being proactive, they're reactive. And
Hmm.
unless you're a Jedi, black belt, stoic monk, you're not going to be super chilled when your child's going through bullying, and have the ability to step back and breathe through it. It's going to be a very emotional experience. And what do we know when we go through something super emotional? Well, we know that when we act in a very emotional way, logic goes down, right?
Hmm.
I think there's even studies on it where when someone's slightly stressed, their IQ massively drops. And so what I noticed is that we make bad decisions when we are reactive or emotional. And so the typical thing I find parents do is they storm into school, they want to speak to the other parent, and things just get worse and they amplify. And so the best thing parents can do is prepare for bullying, right? It's like you prepare your child to defend themselves physically by taking a martial arts class, but what do you do from the psychological point of view? And we've got a system in the Warrior Academy, the Not a Victim system, and there's an audio book out there. If you go onto Spotify or whatever, your Audible, it's free right now. It's Not a Victim, a book I wrote and recorded, and it guides people through a 6P process. And the first step of that, which is really important, is perception. And the first thing I would say to parents and to young students, and this might be black belt content, right? Especially if you're in reactive mode, but that first step is perception, understanding why bullying occurs, and the fact that the bully is probably a victim in their own world, going through something traumatic from someone else or at home and trying to find power in their own lives. And it's funny when we've taught this to young people and we tell it through a story, because kids, they learn so well through stories. What I found is that when you really pass on and cement this lesson, they actually replace that fear with courage, right? And actually they replace that that intimidation factor with sympathy or with empathy. And they go into the bullying situation. They look at the bully and they're like, well, what's wrong? Why are you acting like that? Why are you so upset? And I've had 9 or 10-year-olds go through our program and mentor their bully through bullying. And we've had parents write letters to us just like, this is incredible. I can't believe you've managed to give them that level of emotional intelligence in just step 1. But there's other practical steps in this, right? So perception is one of the first things that parents can work on with their child and work on with themselves. Because as a parent, you're reactive. That's a bad person. They've got bad parents. They're bullying because of this. First of all, perception. The next thing you got to start looking at is basically how we are perceived, right? So it's our body language. 99% of communication as a human being happens with non-verbal communication. So it's as your child walks into the classroom, right? Are they trying to hide themselves? Are they putting their head down, looking to go near the walls, avoid being seen? So what I do with a child who's a victim of bullying is I get them, one child in particular, I sat down in the living room with the mum, and I had the child walk in and out about 50 times, right? And he went from walking in, and I took on the role as the bully. My name was Sam. I think that was the name of the bully at the time. And I had him walk in. I said, I'm Sam, and you are you. Walk into the room and show me how you would walk in if you saw Sam. And he walks into the room and he's this shy kid. I was training in martial arts, and suddenly when I took on this intimidating role of the bully, he was this shy kid who walked off and found somewhere far away from me to sit in the classroom. I taught him to walk in with a big chest, shoulders back, and nod at me as he walks in a non-aggressive but just like mutual respect kind of way, right? Trying to develop this kind of alpha body language. And what was incredible was 20 times into this, 30 times into it, after 50 times into it, he's sitting right next to me and asking me how my day is, right? The next day he goes into school after practicing this, and he said the bully was so shocked at the way he entered the room, he didn't get bullied that day, right? And isn't that incredible? Just by working, and martial arts, we call it drills, right? If you've ever been in the military, you do the same drill every day. You're learning how to load the rifle. In martial arts, you're learning how to throw the jab. You're learning how to keep your hands up until it becomes second nature. And we do that with kids with bullying, with non-verbal communication. And so I just taught him how to enter a room. But there were other traits I noticed, like he would fidget or he would put his hands in his pockets. And so I taught his mum to use verbal cues to correct his body language in a non-invasive way. So I would say to her, use the word pockets if his hands are in his pockets, right? You want him to start speaking with his hands. And so that shows more confidence, right? And you imagine someone speaking on stage with their hands in their pockets. It doesn't show confidence. And
Right.
chin was another one. So his chin would be down, chin would be head up. And so these little verbal cues are something she could then use, in public with him without him feeling like she's saying, remember to keep your chin up so you don't look like a victim and all this sort of stuff, right? So that sort of stuff really helps. Role-playing games are amazing technique. And then obviously it's important to actually have an incident log. So if your child is going through bullying, make sure you're writing down what actually happens. That's massively important, because often, what I find is that a child goes through bullying, they go home, it's their word against the other bullies. The bully tends to rally the other parents. You then go in, speak to the headmaster or headmistress or whatever, and they're like, well, I've got 6 parents here saying your child's the bully. And
Hmm.
I've had victims of bullying being disciplined because of that kind of culture. And so if you have a track record, it really, really helps. So there's lots of kind of practical tips like that, which ultimately we go through with the Not a Victim book. And when I wrote that book, it was interesting because, you know, I had all this depth of knowledge of bullying, having gone through it for 4 years myself and worked with thousands of kids through it. And I was like, people are going to pick up this book for 2 reasons. Either they're being proactive and they want to learn about it to prevent it, or not to prevent it, but to help transition their kids through it, or they're in reactive mode, right? And it was like, I'm building the vitamin and I'm building the paracetamol at the same time. And I realized that I needed to give parents a painkiller right in the
Mm.
middle of the book. So when you have that book, you open it up, bang, right in the middle of the book, you've got follow these 6 steps to overcome bullying in the next 2 weeks, right? And so, you know, that's essentially what I wanted to do, was to, you know, give a reserve parachute to parents who are really struggling with bullying, but also give them the bigger picture so they can prevent chronic bullying and help transition their children through it at a faster rate when it does happen.
That's awesome, man. I think that's you definitely have to give, because if I were to pick up the book right now that I'm talking to you, I know we've talked to our daughters about, you know, kids at school, and they're gonna maybe say things and do things, and you know, that kind of stuff, but never like in an in-depth way, right? Like I
Mm.
I mean, I know I was bullied, like, not, I mean, it was like I don't forgot what grade I was in, but it was a kid that I had to walk home from school with. He was an older kid. I think I was in like the 3rd or 4th grade, and he was like a 7th grader. But his mom, my mom were really good friends. So it's like, okay, you're gonna walk home with him. He'll make sure you get home safe. The kid was a complete jerk. um, and so for that like 6 months where I had to walk home with him, he picked on me every single day all the way home. um, and then one day I had enough, and this is not the way to handle it. If you're listening, it worked for me, but it was not the way to handle it. I just so happened to have baseball practice that day. My dad was going to come pick me up, and so we're walking, and I have my bat bag. I have my bat in my bag, and I don't know if they do this other places in the world. It's gross, but there's a thing called gleeking, where they do like a thing with your tongue, and it kind of makes like a little spray of spit.
All
I
right.
don't, yeah, yeah. It's like it's a gross little boy thing, right? But he kept doing it to me all the way home, like all the way home. And we finally get to like our block,
Um,
and the last time he did it, it was the last time for me. And I just took my bat out of my bag, and I just hit him, and I just kept hitting him. I didn't hit him in the face or anything, but I beat his legs up like pretty bad. Um, and that was the last time he messed with me. So like I said, that's not the best way to handle it, right? But I had dealt with it for
mm.
so long in quiet, right? I didn't tell anybody about it because my
Yeah.
mom was like, this is the only way you have to get home. Like, or you got to walk by yourself. And so I didn't want to put any stress on her. So I didn't say anything. And I wasn't going to tell my dad I was being picked on by some kid. I'm a tough guy, right? I'm not going to tell my dad I'm getting picked on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, so then I
Do
handled it
you
on
know
my
what? Do you know what,
own.
Rod?
Yeah.
But you handled it, right? Like this is the thing. And so a parent can't handle the bullying for their child.
Right.
The child has to handle it. And so if we have there's this culture of kind of helicopter parents and overprotection. I think we prevent kids from ever experiencing failure, which is a whole topic that we could talk about. But ultimately, you know, I feel the role of a parent is empowerment, right? It's so important
Mm-hmm.
that we teach our kids to handle things on their own. We've got to guide them on the right way to handle things. Obviously, if you do that, like if you respond to a bully as a child like that, you're not going to get in that much trouble. You do what you did as an adult, you're in a lot of
Right.
trouble. Do you know what I mean? And so,
Right.
you know, but I find that it's typically you know, the victim of the bullying goes through so much, and they have to go through so much until they reach a point where the pain they're going through is the same as the courage it's going to take for them to overcome the bullying, right? And then they snap. Because for a lot of kids, the pain isn't bad enough for them to say, do you know what, I've got nothing to lose. So it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse until they snap and they build up the courage and they're like, well, either this is such a bad existence, you know,
Mm-hmm.
what's the worst that can happen? I might as well lash out because it's not going to make my life any worse. And it's funny because that's the moment when the bullying tends to fizzle away, to stop, right? And it's, you know, what's fascinating to me is that it takes this element of courage. And I always find there's this make or break it moment with bullying. So when a young person goes through bullying, or when I speak to an adult about bullying, I'm like, did you go through bullying? 80% of parents say yes. And then I say, well, okay, and how did it stop? Was there a make or break it moment where you had to show the level of courage to overcome it? And they said yes. And I'm like, well, isn't that the same as everything in life, right? When you have to overcome something difficult yourself, you've got to show the element of courage that it's got to match the pain. The courage has to match the pain. And yeah, it's just fascinating to me because everything you say about your experience isn't unique, right? It's like everyone has the same story of different intensities, having gone through bullying and then reached this breaking point. And then you know what happens? What often happens is they actually become the bullies themselves, right? Something like 70-80% of kids who go through bullying then become a bully because they've for a long time their ego's been hit. For a long time they've been belittled. They've had a bruised ego, and so they've realized once they have that make or break it moment, they can overcome it by being dominant. And so it feels so good to heal the ego that they then continue this identity of someone who can then do that, right? And so it's this, and the cycle of bullying continues if we don't mentor kids in the right way, right? It's like if we don't mentor them to understand the perception piece, which is why I put that P as the very first step, that bullying continues because they then become a bully. So if you want to break the cycle of bullying, you've actually got to get into the victim's mind and say, look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to overcome it at one point. And when you do, a part of you is going to want to be the bully because you'll want to feel that power and have more control into your life. And so, I don't know if you experienced that. Did you ever become a bully afterwards? You may not have, but I know for a lot of young people, that is a reality.
Not that I know. I don't remember, and I don't think I was a bully to anybody. I think I'm a pretty good guy. I think I was a pretty good guy anyway. But I mean, I could be the villain in somebody's story somewhere, I guess,
But that's the point of fatherhood, I think. When you say to your son or your daughter, look, you're likely to go through this. This is the reality, but I'm going to be there and help you through it, and then I'm going to help you process it, right? So that you learn from it. It doesn't happen again, and you become a good person, not in spite of, but because of. And one of the cool things about Not a Victim, the book, was we interviewed something like 10 to 15 super successful people. We're talking multi-millionaire business owners. We're talking super high-level sports people, incredible individuals who have inspiring stories and huge accolades and, very, very ambitious, very successful. And they all attest the success they've had as an adult to the bullying they went through as a child. And, when I speak to a parent, this is then the black belt content, right? I'm like, okay, I used to give workshops for anti-bullying, and I realized that I needed to go in with a different approach because, I'd sort of stand up and I'd say, well, bullying isn't necessarily bad for your child. And of course, no one wants to hear that. It's like,
right.
Okay, dial it back a little bit. But the reality is, bullying isn't necessarily bad for your child because it's got this ability to transform their character. Because they realize just how resilient they can be. They learn to overcome adversity. And it's the ultimate test of empowerment, right? Can your child go out there, have this huge, big boss moment where they're on the final level, overcome it on their own, and then use those lessons to transform their life, have more courage, have more confidence? And because ultimately, if they don't do that, they go one or two ways. It makes their character or it breaks their character. But it's fascinating to me just how powerful bullying can be as an indicator of future success for a young person. It's for a lot of people, it's the most traumatic thing they experience in their lives because you're young, right? When you're older, you've got more mental strength. You can deal with stuff. If someone physically assaults you as an adult or picks on you or whatever it is, by the time you're in your 30s, you've gone through so much stuff already. You can kind of brush it off to a degree. But as a young person, a 7-8-year-old, being bullied on the way to school, having, as a teenage girl, having, the way you look, the way you sound, your weight, the way you dress, all this sort of stuff torn apart by your peers is so traumatic. This is why it's one of the subjects that I'm passionate about, because it's mentored in the wrong way by so many people, which is why it's such an important thing to discuss.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not to make light of this, but I'm being bullied right now. There's a fly in here. I don't know if you could see it. Like, it just keeps flying back. Like it's just picking
But you
on
know
me
what,
right
Rod?
now. Like,
You haven't even flinched.
yeah,
I've seen the fly, but you haven't even
yeah.
flinched. You know, you got this.
Look,
This is the mental resilience that you need as a dad, right? You're just like laser focused.
right. Look, I
I can
keep
imagine that
thinking
fly
like,
just
yo, just
landing on your head. You're not even moving.
yeah, just let it go. It's you know, as long as I move my hands a little bit, it'll stay out of the way. But it is constantly just zipping back and forth, and it's loud too. It's not like a little quiet fly. Like he's being
Oh, really?
obnoxious.
Yeah.
Like he's
Yeah,
um,
he's
but
taking the
yeah,
mic. He's taking the mic now.
he, yeah. Now he knows I'm talking about him, so now he's trying to show out. Um, but yeah, so bullying. Like again, I'm sorry for making light after such a more serious thing we're talking about. But that work that you're doing with bullying is huge, especially with the growth of social media. I think the benefit that I had, or maybe you had, or people of our generation had, is that we could go home and leave the bully outside, or we could leave school
Yeah.
and leave the bully at school. Like we had an escape route. Like we could get
Yeah.
away from it. But kids now, there's no way out. Like they're they bring their phone home, and everyone at school is on their phone, and there's so many access points to them that if we aren't
Can't run.
proactive,
I can't hide.
yeah, if we
Which
aren't
do you know
proactive
the
in
other thing about
helping them,
cyberbullying? The other thing about cyberbullying, which is really interesting, which I was thinking about recently, I recently did a what I call a deep dive podcast on cyberbullying on the Warrior Academy podcast. I do these a couple of times a week, and I did one on cyberbullying. And one of the things I spoke about was how if you look at normal traditional bullying, right, you could argue that the bully is a coward because they only typically pick on people who are weaker than them. And
mm-hmm,
they will do that in person. Like you and I, when we look back at the bullying we went through as kids, it was traditional bullying. You know, it wasn't done on Instagram, right? So it was done face to face. And
mm-hmm,
so the bully had to feel like they were overpowering you, they were stronger than you. And so there's a level of cowardice within that. But if you look at bullying nowadays with cyberbullying, the reality is there's never going to be a time where they have to be face to face because they can be completely anonymous with an alias, right? They
mm-hmm,
can hide behind a computer screen, put up a fake account, share things, post things, and you will never know who they are. And so A, they're impossible to track down, and B, they never need to feel kind of that level of intimidation from you or worry that you might react because you can't react. And so
mm-hmm,
you're just kind of stuck. A, you can't run or hide, and B, you can't react. You can't find them. You can't react. You can't prevent it. And so, you know, it's funny because, you know, we're both here making content on social media, and bullying continues, right? I'm sure you've had trolls in the past. I've had trolls in the past. Even
mm-hmm.
though I talk about such wholesome stuff, you know, in the Warrior Academy, we're talking about helping kids through bullying and developing their character, developing confidence. You wouldn't believe some of the comments we get from people, and you know, I look at it, I'm like, well, you know, it's you would never say it to me, right? They would never say that sort of stuff to me in person, but behind an alias, it's like no problem. But they can easily do it, easily post something.
Yeah,
And the reality is, you just got to be okay with the fact that, you know, people are going to do that online. That's the reality. There are practical steps you can take as a parent to protect your child from cyberbullying. Restriction of certain apps. I would say only letting them use screens at a certain time during the day so that you can monitor them before and afterwards. Because a lot of the time with bullying is they won't tell you they're going through bullying, right? There's that element of
mm-hmm,
shame or guilt, especially like you experienced. You didn't want to tell your dad you're going through bullying, right? You don't want to tell your father
right,
you're going through bullying because he'll be like, in your mind, you're thinking, I've got to be this strong young man. I don't want to show a weakness. And
right,
so the reality there is a lot of young boys in particular don't share the fact they're going through bullying. Um, and so, you know, this kind of issue then spirals and gets worse and worse and worse until they snap. But if you look at cyberbullying, I think that we can watch our kids. They're on the iPad or they're on the computer, whatever it is, on their phone for an hour between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. Right? What's their mood like afterwards? Are they in a better mood or a worse mood? Little things
yeah,
like this, just monitoring them, looking for the subtle signs of bullying. If they go on their iPad or they go on their, you know, whatever it is, phone or whatever, for a solid hour, and you notice their mood shift, and they're now you know, they're maybe negative self-talk, or they're you know, they're a bit quiet or a bit shy or maybe in a really bad mood, that could be an indicator that they're going through bullying, right? But I think the reality is you've got to prepare young people for the reality that cyberbullying is something that they will have to experience the rest of their life into adulthood. And I think that it's, we can't prevent that, just like normal bullying. In fact, it's probably worse. But I think what's important is that we teach them that the perception phase, why this occurs, right? The fact that it doesn't necessarily matter what the other person thinks. It's about having that strength of character yourself, to kind of block them out and focus on being your true, authentic self without worrying too much. Easier said than done, right? Even adults struggle with that. But it's a lifelong pursuit of strengthening your character and building resilience, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I feel like I share some decent like content as well. And you be surprised the DMs are like, even in the comment section, like I read the comments so I could reply back to people because there's always questions and things that I think, to clarify or whatever. And so I'm in the comments section, and my wife though, she reads them like and takes offense, like she has to
Yeah,
defend me. I'm like, yo, just don't even look at it. Like they don't. First of all, they don't know me at all, right? Whoever that is, I don't know who
yeah,
that person is. They don't know who I am. If they can't talk to me directly, then their opinion of me doesn't necessarily matter. So whatever. But she's like,
yeah.
no, these people are crazy, and I'm like, maybe, I don't know, but that's not for me to judge. It is what it is. They got a little bit more free time on their hands than I do.
I think the reality is you've got to. I think the challenging thing is as your audience grows, can you withstand negativity, which will undoubtedly grow, right?
Hmm.
In order to help those that maybe don't even respond to you because you're helping them, right? And it's like you're putting yourself out there to try and generate content, to create, ideas, thoughts, to share your opinion and best practice to help people. But as a
Right.
byproduct, you're going to get people trolling you, cyberbullying, all this sort of stuff, right? It's people want all the success without the reality that comes with it. Yeah, they want. It's like, I want to have 1 million followers, but I don't want to have any trolls like that. If you want that, you get this, right? It's like, if this then that. There's a yin and yang with everything. I think, there's a balance, and so you just got to truly accept that, I think. It's difficult. I think it's a lot worse if they knew you, right? So if they knew you and they were writing comments on it, you'd be like, oh god,
Right.
this
Yeah.
is
Oh
much
man.
worse. But
Yeah, I might actually be a bad person if people I know are talking bad about me.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it suddenly becomes really real.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about like the work that you're doing with other people's children, and that's phenomenal
Mm.
work. But you're a dad yourself, right? You have two children, and tell us a little bit about that experience, right? Because you got two younger ones. How is that going?
Yeah, do you know what? It's such a privilege to have kids. And I've got lots of friends who struggle to have kids, and all they want in their lives is to experience parenthood. And so I feel very blessed to be in a position where I can. Um, I've got an amazing wife who's just an amazing mum. We're a very traditional relationship in that sense. Um, you know, I'm in a unique position now where in my 20s, all of my focus and energy and effort was on other people's kids. And now in my 30s, I'm able to kind of bring that in and focus a lot on my own kids. And, they're 3 and 6. And I figure that when they get to 10 years old, they want to be on their own more. They don't want to spend time with their dad or their mum quite as much, right? And so it's these years are really important. And so I do a lot of my work from home. I spend a lot of time with them. I travel a lot with the family, and it's at this age where I'm the most important person in their life. When they get to teenagers, it's like they want to hang out with their friend more than me and all this sort of stuff. And so,
Hmm.
I very much honor that as a dad. And if they were to walk in right now, it'd be a case of I just kind of pause the podcast and speak to them. Right? I've always said, it's got to be. I don't want them to ever come to me and be like, he found something else more important than us. Do you know what I mean? Even if I'm in
Yeah.
I'm on the radio or something like that, I would just kind of make a joke about it, because the reality is they don't forget things like that, right?
Right.
But ultimately, when I look back to my 20s, my first daughter, and I briefly mentioned it earlier. I was an extreme sports athlete, and so I've got over 500 base jumps and skydives around the world. And I was in an extreme sports group with there's about 15 to 20 of us, and we were wingsuit base jumping around the world. And it's one of the most dangerous sports on the planet, if not the most dangerous sport, right? And so I was really pushing human flight and trying to see how far we could push our bodies, and jumping off some of the most incredible cliffs in the Alps and the Dolomites, and in America as well. And I found myself pushing this sport further and further and further until I was in Switzerland, and I had an accident. It was my 7th jump of the day, and my canopy collapsed essentially, and I dropped, and I broke everything in my body. From the waist down, both legs, both feet, both ankles. The surgeon said I'd never walk again. I was 24. I met my wife, I think about 4 weeks before the accident. So when she met me, I was a professional fighter doing Thai boxing, best shape of my life, and an extreme sports athlete who was jumping out of planes and off cliffs every weekend, right? And 4 weeks later, I was basically permanently disabled, was told I could never walk again. And that was in July 2014. And it was amazing because that forced me to spend more time at home with her. And so we developed this incredible relationship. And I remember initially, saying to her, look, I don't want to see you, because didn't want our relationship to be where she was kind of saving me. Do you know what I mean? From what I was going through. But when you look at martial arts, I use Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is kind of low impact, a lot of floor work to kind of do rehabilitation. And over the course of 2 years, I learned how to walk again, and it was incredibly painful, mentally, physically, everything. During that phase, I lost 15 close friends, in the sport.
Wow.
So while I was lying at home on a bed and I couldn't move, I'd lost 15 friends, and so I had to go through all of this at the age of 24. But what was fascinating was, as soon as I was fixed, I wanted to jump again. Right, I could just about limp, and I was ready to do a jump in Sweden, and when I was about to do the jump, the winds picked up, there was snow everywhere. We climbed back down. It was too risky, and I think if I'd done that jump, it was potentially fatal. But pretty much a month after that, on the exact same date that I had an accident, exactly 3 years later, in the same hospital I had the surgery, my daughter was born. My first daughter was born, right? And it was crazy. It was midnight. She was born at exactly midnight on the same date as this accident. And as I held this tiny living thing in my arms, I realized that my life didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to my kids. And if I carried on the life I was doing as a young guy in his 20s pushing extreme sports, it's likely she grew up without a father. And so what I did is I said, I wanted to dedicate my life to working with young people, which started with my own child, right? With empowering my own child. I realized that the resilience I developed to get me through that trauma over the last few years stemmed from the character development I had as a young person. And so what I realized was I couldn't always be there for my kids, but I wanted to give them the tools and the skills to have that level of empowerment so they could face life's obstacles on their own, like I did. But I didn't just want to do that for my child. I wanted to do that for thousands of kids around the world, which is how the Warrior Academy grew. But in a lot of ways, my daughter kind of saved my life, right? Because, if I didn't have her, I would have carried on jumping. And if I carried on jumping with the statistics that you see with wingsuit base jumping, like, it was inevitable what would have happened in my life. And so, it was, I think that for a lot of dads and mums, but for a lot of dads, I'm a dad, I can only speak from my perspective, having kids gives you this laser focus on what really matters in life. Having kids forces you to become more responsible, more dependable. And if you're a good dad, it massively enhances and grows your character. For the first time in your life, arguably for a lot of dads, they don't think selfishly. You've now got to think unselfishly, right? Like my wants and needs come secondary to my family. It's like my whole purpose is to serve my family and then the community and then myself in a lot of ways, right? Like, of course, you can't serve, from an empty cup. You've got to have the basics of, good health, good sleep, happiness, all this sort of stuff. But ultimately, it's about looking after my family, and that's what I think fatherhood is. Maybe I'm old school with that, but certainly that's how I feel.
Yeah, man. You know what? I think a lot of guys would agree, and maybe not as extreme, right? Maybe not like jumping off a cliff and all that, but I think, and I know I felt that way when I found out I was going to be a father. I immediately felt like my life had purpose, because up to that point I was pursuing just career, right? I was just doing whatever I thought was right to grow myself in my career. Um,
Yeah,
but then when I heard those words, "You're going to be a dad," like this is it. Like, this is what I'm here for. I figured it
yeah,
out. Like, there was no question in my mind. But I think a lot of guys would agree that having a child saved their life, right? Because if they were to continue to
yeah,
carry on, and like I said, maybe not as extreme, they're not jumping off of cliffs, but they're just doing stuff, right? We're just we're
yeah,
guying. We're out there doing dude stuff, right? We're partying or drinking or whatever, or we're driving too fast, or we're just we're ready to fight people unnecessarily. um but then when we have a kid, it all shifts, right? It puts life
yeah.
into perspective, and like you said, your priorities
The
are
ultimate
shifted.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Do you know what's interesting? When I have the antidote to poor conduct or bad behavior is responsibility. And we have kids coming into our class they go to school and they're told they're badly behaved, they're naughty, all this sort of stuff. You've got 9 or 10 year old kids. Sometimes they've got ADHD, and so it's not even their fault. They're just acting out because they've got all this energy, and that behavior is reinforced. They go to school and their identity is, you're a badly behaved kid, you're naughty.
Mm.
We've got parents coming to us saying, my kid's naughty, can you improve that behavior? And I'm like, first things first, let's change the language, because they will grow into whatever we talk. The way we speak about a child, they grow into that. But the first thing I typically do when I've got a class and there's a child who's got, let's say, destructive behavior, is I give them responsibility, right? I'll give them a little role within the class, and that could be the first time they've ever been given responsibility. So when you talk about young men who, typically young men, there's a saying, it's like a Danish, I'm half Danish. So the Danish saying is have you run the horns off the bull yet? Right? It's like young men have this like fire inside them, this testosterone inside them where they need to go and do stuff, right? And they need to explore. And often that behavior, that energy can be kind of destructive, both for their own lives or people around them. And
Hmm.
so it's funny because when you give a young man who's gone through that a child, it's like this is now the ultimate responsibility. And so they either, true manning up is like manning up and taking responsibility of looking after a living thing. And for me, it's like, now you have to evolve as a person, as a man, to take on this responsibility. And it truly, evolves your character. And I look at a lot of people say, if you have a business and you have kids, it's going to slow down your business growth. Did the complete opposite for me. As soon as I had kids, our business grew by like 10 times. It was ridiculous how fast we grew because I just had laser focus. It gives you that kind of moonshot, a bit like the black belt, right? It gives you that moonshot to have the discipline to really evolve as a person. So yeah, responsibility, the antidote to poor conduct, right?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely worked for me. Like, I wasn't doing anything bad, but I laser focused on, okay, this is my family, and I have to make sure that they're all taken care of. Like, I can't be on the other side of the country for work. Like, I need to figure out how I can transition my work and my business to being home and being present. And I was going to ask you about that with as many things as you're doing, as many different programs as you have, and you're speaking, you're traveling, and I'm assuming maybe the family travels with you, but if that's not the case, and I guess you can explain that here too. Um, with all of that you're doing, how are you still able to find ways to be present and involved and engaged and to be the father that you want? Because a lot of guys that I talk to, that's one of their biggest struggles is, I got to go out and provide, and I have to go work, or I have to go do, these things outside the house to take care of the house. So my head is telling me that I have to
Yeah,
provide, but my heart is telling me I need to be present. What the heck do I do?
yeah. So the first thing I think that as a dad, you need to have exceptional time management. I think that, gone are the days where you can just have a lie-in and be relaxed and chilled all the time and not worry about your schedule. If you want to be a good dad and you want to be successful in business or your work, you need to have exceptional time management. So, I have a strict calendar. If it's in the calendar, it's getting done. I've got an amazing executive assistant called Sarah who manages my calendar. Getting a great EA as a business owner is a game changer because they kind of act as a gatekeeper. So before, I would have a million messages popping up on my phone. I had 3 or 4 email addresses. I'd probably have 100 emails a day. Now I don't do emails anymore. Like, I just refuse to do emails. I do WhatsApp voice messages. The majority of my communication with the business is through my assistant Sarah, who then kind of navigates all the different people who want to speak to me and prioritizes stuff for me. But that's, I've got to a point where I can do that, where I can now,
Mm-hmm.
employ an amazing EA, which for me was a big jump, but that was a game changer at this end. But the other things that I do are, I think that as a dad, you need to be present. And for me to be present, I need to do things like train hard. If I train hard during the day, I'm more present when I'm around the kids, right? And so I get up early, I train super hard. I think I train about 3 hours a day minimum at the moment. And for me, it creates that kind of space in my mind where now I'm able to look after the kids when they're home, spend time with them. And I think that having non-negotiable kind of slots in your calendar really helps. That might sound strange, right? Like if my kids really need me, I'll just drop everything. But the idea of a non-negotiable slots in your calendar is you put it in and you're saying to yourself, even if I've got a busy day, that's a predetermined slot where I'm going to spend time with my kids. My dad was in the Marines and the Paras when I was younger, right? So he would go on exercise, you'd go to war, go on tours for 6 months at a time. We wouldn't see him. But one thing I learned from that was when he was home, he was very present. And the reality there is it was less about quantity and more about quality.
Mm.
So the first thing I would say to a busy dad who's out there smashing it and trying to grow his business or his career is don't feel guilt or shame about being there all the time. There is a nurturing element to parenting where one of you needs to be there to nurture and look after the kids on a day-to-day basis, right? And there's that nurturing energy. But there's also typically, someone in the family who's out there and, pushing the career side or pushing the finance side to try and provide for the family, which is so important. And that person often feels guilt or shame about not being home. But what I would say is, whenever I look back at my dad, who was away for long periods of time, I never think, God, he was never there. He wasn't a good dad. I think what an amazing dad he was, because he taught me the power of being present. And your kids will remember 20 minutes of undivided attention more than 6 hours of you at home on your phone or on Netflix, right? Where you're just around them. So
Right.
focus on quality over quantity. That for me is vital. The other thing I'd say is when this element of guilt or shame, if you're career driven or business driven or whatever, is what a brilliant lesson it is for your kids to see you out there trying to serve the world, community, make everything a better place, or even serving the family by pursuing something that you care deeply about, right? I'd like to think my kids would see me working hard on building the Warrior Academy so that, they think when they're older, he really cared about empowering young people. He really cared about character development. He went out there and took big risks to help so many children around the world, especially in developing countries, change their lives. And I think what an amazing lesson to pass on to kids. And, when we were talking about how kids learn through, so they copy what you do, right? It's less about what you talk about and more about how you act. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. If you're out there pursuing something meaningful that serves mankind and you're exploring your full potential to serve mankind, that is a hell of a lesson to pass on to your kids, right? They're gonna grow up watching that, and what an amazing character trait to pass on. So those are my kind of initial thoughts around that.
Yeah, the calendar and scheduling was a game changer for me. Even now, like I have a pretty good grasp on my day and my life, but like if things aren't put on my calendar, I'm gonna forget them, right? Like it
Yeah,
just is what it is. Like I have to be honest with myself. My wife says I have ADD or ADHD, and maybe I do. I'm sure I'm touched, or whatever. But like if I have a free space where I'm just like don't have something, 100 different things can happen during that time. Like I could be
yeah,
doing anything, and none of it gets done to completion. But I'll do like several different things all at that time, right? So
yeah,
having things on my calendar, you know, there's this like feeling of, well, it's scheduled and that's weird, but no, it's not, because I schedule time with my family, or because I schedule time with my wife, with my kids, that time doesn't get touched by anything else because everything has its time, everything has its slot, everything goes where it's supposed to go. So when it's their time,
Yeah.
nobody else gets that time, right? Like it's untouched by every other thing because I know that I was able to give 100% to work today because work had its slot, right? So now when it's
Yeah.
kid time, I'm not thinking about work anymore. Work is done. Like this is kid time. Just me and you
And you're
guys.
not feeling
We're
guilty.
gonna do whatever. Yeah.
I often say, to my wife, it's like if I don't have this focus on training, or I don't have this focus on work, and this separate focus on kids, it's like I'll just kind of um, I won't be able to do it to my full ability. Like I'll be
Hmm.
half a dad because I'm in there thinking about work, or I'm half a business owner because I'm thinking about the kids. So I've got to be fully into something, and that's what those calendar blocks do. It's interesting because when we were talking about this, one of the things that comes to mind is teamwork. I think if you are, if you've got an amazing partner, that is a game changer. Like if you want to be a
Hmm.
better dad, have an amazing partner. I
Yes,
think
sir.
it's one of the most important. Who you choose to be with is one of the most important decisions you make as a dad, right? And one of the stories I have is I'm obviously very future focused. A lot of the stuff I do, I'm doing things which 10 years, I'm going to see the benefit in 10 years time, or I'm thinking about next year and we could do this, we could do that. And you need that energy to grow something.
Hmm.
My wife's very present moment focused, right? She's thinking about right now, the present moment. And it was funny because we were in Thailand. It's a little story which kind of sums it up quite well. We were in Thailand a couple of years ago, and we went down to a beach, and it was wet season, and we had been there before a couple of years back. And I was trying to find a restaurant that we once went to, but all of the restaurants were closed during wet season along this beach. So what I said is, look, we've got the kids there. I'm gonna race on ahead, and I'm gonna try and find the restaurant that we went to and see if anything's open here because the kids are hungry, I'm hungry, we're all hungry, right? Walking down this beach. So off I go down this beach, and I'm on this 1 hour hike to try and find a restaurant. I'm an hour ahead of them. I then cut back into town and I try and find them again. It takes me an hour and a half to get back to them, and I'm like, oh, I get to her and I'm like, it's a complete failure. I can't find anything open. I know you're all hungry. I'm hungry. Just like absolute disaster. And she held my hand and she looked at me and she said, look at the kids. And they're just there digging in the sand, playing. And I said, she said to me, this is the reason we're here, right? It's not to find something, to find food or to go and eat. It's to just to be present in the moment and enjoy what we're doing. And it was an incredible moment there of just kind of eye-opening realization where you have a good partner and they bring you from being future focused straight into the moment. And I think that's like my wife does with me a lot, and it certainly helps me benefit from enjoying what I'm doing in that moment with the kids, because that's one of the hard things I think a lot of people who are career or business focused have, right? It's like, how can they really focus on the kids when their mind is worrying about this or thinking about that? And so having an amazing partner who brings you to the present, game changer, you know?
Yeah. 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 I agree, man. I agree that partner because I think I'm decent, right? But she makes me better. She forces just
Yeah.
like my kids, just like having my kids force me to be a better man. My wife forces me to be a better man. And not only does she force me to because she has a certain standard that she lives at and that I can't be less than her standard. But then also
Yeah.
like she's supportive, she's encouraging, she also pushes me, you know what I mean? Like there's so many different things about it where I could probably just coast and do my thing and be cool, and then she'll be like, you know what, why don't you try that? Like, why didn't you
Yeah.
do that? Like you've been talking about it,
She holds you
go
accountable.
do it. Yeah.
I love that. That's a healthy relationship, right? I think you get in life what you tolerate. Whether it's if we've all got tolerance levels. So if you tolerate being overweight and you're okay with that, you'll be overweight. If your
Right.
tolerance level is like, I need to be less than 15% body fat, and that's like your level. Anything more than that, you're not happy. That becomes your tolerance level. If your tolerance level with work is this or whatever it is, right? You need to push yourself a certain way. But it's the same with relationships. So one of the things that I think our relationship is great for, and it sounds like yours as well, is and for a lot of healthy relationships I've seen, is it's two people who have their own standards of what they want out of a relationship, and they don't tolerate bad behavior in a certain way. It's like, this is what I want out of a relationship. So I'm going into that thinking, this is who my ideal partner is. And they make that decision before they then commit long term, especially with kids or marriage, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's a case of kind of in a very supportive way, holding your partner accountable to that, that kind of image that you've both got for what each other do in the roles. And I think that's brilliant. Sometimes I've had my confidence knocked or whatever, and my wife's been like, well, you can do this, and that's that kind of nurturing and supportive feminine energy, which I think it makes you step up as a guy. It gives you that kind of push to be more masculine and to go out and do more, right? And so if you don't have that, it's like, are you ever going to reach your full potential? Because I think we as men really feed off that. It's incredible to want to go and serve that and to work with a partner on that. And so for me, that's it's all about tolerance levels for me with most things in life.
Yeah, yeah. I was reading the Perfect Day by Craig Ballantyne. He talks about like having rules, right? Having rules in your life, or roles and rules. And he's like, if you're a vegetarian and you go to a party and they offer you meat, you don't eat meat, right? Because you're a vegetarian. Like, so I'm just not gonna eat, right? But
Yeah.
we don't have these rules for ourselves, so we'll go places or do things that maybe don't line up with what we really want, but we just do them just cause, we're just kind of going by the seat of our pants or whatever. And so my wife, for me, she makes sure, like, I have rules for myself, but she helps me stay on those, right? Because I'll let it go. I'll be like, I don't really want to do that today. I'm real cool about that. Like, I'd rather chill today.
Yeah.
I'll just chill. But she, and then knowing that she's there, right, is like that extra layer for me, right? It's like,
Yeah.
if I don't, right, if I do say I'm not going to do it, and I'm like, but she's going to come home and she's going to be like, oh, I thought you said you were going to do.
The ultimate accountability, right?
Exactly. And my kids
Any
are
good
like that
partnership.
now.
Oh,
Say it
really?
again.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, any good partnership, there's amazing accountability, right? You hold yourselves to a certain standard. But I love that. I think that this is missing in society at the moment. People say they're going to do something and they don't do it, and then they say they're going to meet up. They'll meet you at a restaurant at a certain time, and then they bail last minute. People are so easy and quick to flake or to cancel plans, or or their own promises. And so what I find is that if you are an individual who says you're going to do something and then you don't do it, ultimately what you're saying is that you're not trustworthy, right? You're saying to yourself that the things I promise myself I'll do, I won't necessarily do. And subconsciously, we're always being trained by an inner voice, right? And subconsciously, it's like, well, okay, if you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, then nothing you really say matters. And so you start to lose confidence. It impacts your self-esteem. And so I'm like really neurotic on this. If I say I'm going to do something, even if circumstances change a lot, I'll be like, I'm doing it, and it could be, it could be frustrating with people around me. But for me, it's holding integrity to my word. And, this is an old school, I see it as like an old school masculine trait to do that, right? We used to, your word used to mean something. And I think that it should. I think that, your word and a handshake used to mean something. Now you need a contract for everything. And if you don't have a contract, guess what? Someone might take advantage of you. And I've got a small group of very close friends who I would do anything for. And it's for me, that strength of that relationship happens because I never commit to something unless I say I'm gonna, if I say I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it, and that's it, right? And I think that's such an important quality for fathers and for men in general, right? And for women, of course. But if we're talking about fathers and being a man, then I would say, if you say you're going to do something to yourself, do it. Your kids will watch, and they will have the same character traits, just like you're doing with your kids, right, Rod?
Right. It's integrity, right? Like, and not only integrity, like, but also some stick to it. Is not a word. Stick to itiveness, right? So staying true to what you said you would do, even after the feeling that you said it in passes, right? Like you just have to stick to
Like
it. Like
your
you said,
emotions have nothing to do with it. Like your emotions have nothing to do with it. And I think that's a reality for a lot of stuff that dads do, right? It's like, well, just because your emotions on the day change, you're still doing it, right? You wake up and you're, I don't want to go to the gym today. Well, guess what? You're doing it anyway, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
said you're going to do it. You go to the gym, and that's strength of character, and that's what a lot of people are missing these days for sure. It's something that martial arts taught me. I think, when I look back, it's doing things regardless of how you feel because they're the right thing to do, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's necessary. It's definitely necessary. So we've talked about a whole lot of things, right? We talked about bullying and character development and fatherhood and all kinds of stuff. But it's obviously a fatherhood podcast, and so it's important that I ask. And I seem to get a little bit of a different answer kind of every time I ask this, and I think it's because fatherhood is just such a big thing, right? There's so many things that kind of fall
Yeah.
under that umbrella. But I'm curious to know what does fatherhood mean to you?
What does fatherhood mean to me?
Mm-hmm.
Fatherhood to me is this balance of empowerment and protection, right? It's my job as a father is to protect my family and protect my wife, protect my kids, and protect myself, which is interesting, right? If you look at the earlier conversations we had about my early 20s, right? So protecting
Mm-hmm.
myself so that I can be a father, but it's also about empowering my kids to live without me. And if you look at my relationship with my wife, right? She's very nurturing, very traditional, feminine energy. I'm the opposite, more of a masculine energy. When it comes to teaching them to swim, I think my kids would have worn their armbands for the rest of their life. I think they would be, they'd be 40 years old with their own kid wearing armbands. Whereas I'm like, right, cool, take the armbands off, chuck you in the deep end. Can you swim? Yes, you can swim. Only a couple of meters. Cool, we'll build on that, right? And for her,
Yeah.
that's completely terrifying. But I think that for me is that fatherhood energy. It's about obviously being nurturing, especially with modern dads. It's very much a nurturing energy as well, but it's having the kind of the ability to empower your kids to face things without you, right? So I'm
Mm.
constantly thinking, like what can I do to make sure my kids can live without me? And I know that sounds really strange because you don't really want that to happen, but the majority of the issues they face in their life are going to be without you. The difficult, traumatic experiences that they go through in the moment will be without you because as a parent, you're not always there holding their hand, right? And so for me, it's this balance. Fatherhood is this balance between protection and empowerment.
See, that's the first time I've heard someone say empowerment, but it totally makes sense, right? Because that is
Yeah.
what we're doing, hopefully, right? Is what we are doing for our children is we're empowering them to, because eventually, regardless of what we want, they're eventually going to meet the world on their own. They're going to be outside of our
Yeah.
house. They're going to be adults. Like I say all the time, we're not raising kids, we're raising adults. And so if we aren't
Yeah.
empowering them to go out into that world, then maybe we're selling them short. And so empowerment, I like that. I like that. I'm definitely going to have to use that as one of my tool words there. Um, okay, let's do this. I have two more questions for you, kind of a two-part thing. Um, if you
Sure.
had a message, right, and maybe you already have this, right, but if you had a message that you wanted to give to fathers, right, like so you put together a program and you marketed it phenomenally. You have every father in the world, they show up, and let's say it's a podcast. It's the Warrior Academy podcast. They're going to sit down and they're going to listen to you speak. What do you want
Yeah.
them to hear?
So what message would I give to fathers? The first thing I would say is to focus on character. Focus on developing your own character. When you develop your own character and you develop a strong black belt character, your kids will copy that. So one of the most relieving things about parenting I find is that ultimately all you need to do is work on yourself. If you improve the person you are as a dad, your kids will see that too and they'll mimic that, right? So that's the first thing I would
Mm-hmm.
say. The next thing I would say is the old school traditional traits that a lot of people are labeling as toxic masculinity incorrectly, which are, you know, important masculine traits like courage, like resilience, these things which are kind of being watered down in today's society, they still hold true. So the traditional positive masculine role needs to be reinforced, and I think is a very, very positive influence in your kids. So I would look into maintaining those strong values and giving your kids a moral compass. The next thing I would say is having that focus on character and a moral compass is really important, whether it's through religion or whether it's through other things like martial arts. But giving your child a moral code to live by is vital, because it helps them navigate things when they question everything around them. So those few things I would say initially, and then I would go down and I would probably talk about some of the most important traits of managing time, like we've spoken about, but ultimately how being on your life mission is important for your kids to see. Don't feel guilt or shame around being out of the house and working hard, because your kids are seeing that. Focus on quality over quantity. When you are with your kids, be fully present, and don't be half here and half there. If you're there, be there, because they'll remember that, right? I look back at, like I said, with my dad, and I never think, oh, he was never around. I think how present he was when he was around. And that is something your kids will remember. So that's my message for fathers.
I like that. And I'll touch on that toxic masculinity thing for a second, because you mentioned some masculine traits that go along with masculinity. And like, I think when I don't like the term toxic masculinity. Like it I don't know how it got out into mainstream. It was never really a mainstream thing. It was a psychologist thing that they were using when they were studying inmates. And there's a whole thing to it, right? But somehow society
Yeah.
grabbed a hold of it and we ran with it, right? I think
Yeah.
masculinity, or really anything in excess, can be considered to be toxic. For example, like using one of the traits you mentioned, like strength, right?
Yeah.
If all I have is strength, then at some point that strength becomes a detriment to me, because when I need to have finesse, then if I have a bow and arrow, right, I can pull it back, and I need strength to be able to pull it back. But if that strength is too much, I break the bow, right?
Yeah.
Now it's useless to me. Maybe I can throw the arrow, right? And I'm so strong I can throw the arrow, but I need a bit of finesse to make sure. I need some patience. I need these other virtues that are going to help me do what I need to do. And I think a lot of times men get caught in these situations where we're overcompensating with one or two or three of those traits, and it's in the wrong context. Like, when I need you to be, like we mentioned, nurturing is masculinity and femininity are a scale, right? So men can be nurturing, right? In a situation where I need you to be nurturing, if all you can give me is aggression, well, that's toxic. Like, I don't need that
Yeah.
right now. I don't. And so we have to have the ability to have a full range of traits and not just be locked on one. And again, I don't think
Yeah.
toxic masculinity is a thing. I just think that men have sometimes, and in some cases, put themselves in boxes of this is all I can be. And then society has also helped, like, put a padlock on that box and say, yeah, this is what you can be. And that
Yeah.
becomes toxic, right?
Yeah. I totally agree with you on that. I think toxic masculinity and the labeling of toxic masculinity came from a good place. I think that it was designed to prevent people from having misogynistic ideas or reinforcing bad behavior. Things like boys will be boys, which people would argue reinforces bad behavior. But I would argue is a societal message given to young boys to say to them, you are going to live a more physical life. Like, the bullying that I see young boys going through is more physical than it is for women or young girls, right?
Right.
So in that situation where you label something boys will be boys, which basically is typically, people will say boys will be boys when the boys are fighting, right? And in that sort of situation, it's like, well, where else? What else can they do to prepare them for a more physical life? Because if we can't, if we can't give them that, and we can't let them, kind of be physical with each other, then where will they learn that? And this is where things like martial arts can help. But certainly, I think it came from a good place, but it's gone too far. The word toxic masculinity is used inappropriately, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think that the reality is, it's not, as you said, it's about the extremes of behavior. It's not about masculinity being toxic. It's about behavior being toxic, right? So I think this term toxic masculinity should be replaced by toxic behavior. Also, another thing you mentioned, which is interesting, is nurturing. Now, nurturing for me is a feminine energy. So this is where I feel people have got it wrong when it comes to masculine and feminine. Both males and females have both masculine and feminine energy, right?
Agreed.
If you want to go out there and build a big business and be very career driven, this is a masculine energy, but women have that too, of course, right? There are incredibly successful women who have amazing businesses and careers, but it's typically a masculine energy. And you've got incredible dads who really focus on staying at home, looking after the kids and so on, and it's a feminine energy, right? That doesn't
Hmm.
mean that they're less of a man or they're less of a woman. It's always this balance of masculine and feminine energy within everyone's lives. And I think if rather than me looking at it like a gender thing, which I think is confusing a lot of people out there these days, and there's kind of this kind of um, blank canvas approach to gender at the moment, where everything's very neutral and no one really knows what's going on. It's very confusing for kids. Instead, let's accept that every individual has a balance of masculine and feminine energy, right? And we show that in different ways. And to be a brilliant dad, I think you need to have a perfect balance, which is have excellent nurturing qualities, but also have
Hmm.
that ability to instill strong masculine values in your kids, especially in your sons, right? And so I think that's really important. I think also that in any relationship, you've got this balance of masculine and feminine energy. If one's more masculine, the other's more feminine. In most successful relationships, the more feminine one is, the more masculine one feels. The more masculine one is, the more feminine the other feels, right? So I think in a perfect relationship, you've got that perfect balance. In the most successful relationships I've seen. So do you know what? Like gender and masculine, femininity and toxic masculinity is such a relevant topic nowadays, and I think everyone's very scared to touch it because they can get cancelled very quickly, right?
Right.
But
Right.
you look at people like Andrew Tate, and he talks about masculinity in this way, and obviously it's very clickbaity, and he's very cleverly. He's very cleverly pressing on a bruise for his commercial benefit, but ultimately
Right.
the bruise was already there, right?
Right.
He's pressing on a bruise that already exists. So you push enough, and you call the behavior of young men toxic, and say that's toxic masculinity enough, it'll eventually get pushback. What I
Hmm.
think is, rather than labeling things as, talking about the negativity of masculinity at its extreme, let's talk about the positivity of masculinity at its extreme. Those natural masculine traits of protectiveness,
Right.
courage, strength, honor, these things that used to be known as very stereotypical masculine traits. Why don't we look at them in a very positive light, right? I often say to parents, whatever you talk about with your kids, they'll grow into. Whenever you talk to a child, you paint a picture of what they'll become. So if you constantly talk about toxic masculinity and toxic this, and rather than saying positive masculinity, this is the way to be the ultimate man, to look after your family and to have these masculine traits and to be nurturing and to balance it all out. These are the qualities that make you a great dad, right? I think that's the approach we should have instead of talking about toxic masculinity. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You got a supporter here, bro. Okay. Second part to that question. One more podcast is going out. This one though is not as big an audience, right? This one is a very targeted group. Only two people are going to be able to hear it. Two people as of right now. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be more, but there's two people right now that get to
I
hear
know where you're going with
it.
this.
And those two people are your kids. What do you want them to hear?
As a message to my kids for their lives, or a message about fatherhood?
A message to your kids from you. Could be about you as a father, could be a message that you want them to learn in life. It's your
Mm.
choice. You're the host.
Okay, cool. I would say to my kids, focus in life on exploring your full potential to serve yourself and mankind. I think that's where you'll find happiness. I think human beings have a unique desire to serve other people, without realizing it. We think we're doing it for ourselves, but we're not. You get more happiness when you serve other people. So the first thing I would say is, what unique gifts can you explore? See life as an adventure of exploring your unique gifts, not a horrible pressure of, I need to find out what my purpose is. Often that comes to you by experiencing different things. So I would say to my kids to try everything until they fall in love with something they care about, and then explore their full potential to serve mankind through that unique gift. That's the first thing I would say. The next thing I would say is focus above all on character. By developing your character and focusing on your own character, you become a better person who's able to face life's obstacles. help navigate traumatic experiences, make the right decisions when you need to, all because you've got a strong set of values, a moral compass which you follow. And what else would I say to my kids? I think those two things are, explore the things, explore your passions, and explore your full potential to serve mankind through those unique gifts, and focus on your character. Those are the two things I would pass on to my kids, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, and you embody that, right? Like exploring all these things, like you're military, you go to college, you're an architect for a little bit, right? Then you go to India, right? Then you make your way to
Yeah,
Thailand, you become a fighter, and then you start jumping off of cliffs, and then you become an instructor, personal trainer in there somewhere, right? And then you become an
yeah.
instructor, and now I mean, if anyone is to tell you to explore life and pursue helping people, you're the man that should say that, right? And that's a perfect message. Your
Thank you.
children, like, that's a very authentic message. Like, they're gonna hear that and be like, you know what, Dad lived that. He lived what he's saying, and I can believe it, and it's authentic, and that's something that's awesome for them to hear. That's a great episode, man. I think that's a phenomenal episode that you just dropped on the kids.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I think we could talk about this all day long.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, if guys are wanting to reach out to you, I know you don't check your emails, so but if they want to reach out
My
to
emails
you,
get checked. My emails do get checked, but yeah. If people want to reach out to me personally, they can find me on Instagram, seb.bates, or we're really pushing our Warrior Academy podcast right now, which is amazing. We've got amazing guests. We've got mat chats, so stories of character development we do specifically for kids. We've
nice,
got deep dives with me on certain topics, just like this. And so that's the Warrior Academy podcast. You can find that on YouTube or Spotify, or on iTunes. Obviously, I've got the book, so Warrior Method and Not a Victim. Warrior Method is more about character development. Not a Victim is about anti-bullying. So yeah, that's how you can find us.
awesome, awesome. Look, man, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know it's early-ish there. You probably have already done 3 hours of training though, so this is not a not a big deal for you. But I appreciate it, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story and talk about all the things that we talked about today. I know for sure that I'm going to walk away from this, and I already have some things that I'm walking away with that I'm gonna start to implement, and I'm sure the guys that are listening are going to have some things as well. So thank you, man. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me on. Really, really excited to get this episode out to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, bro. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, mate. Great to see
All
you.
right. All right.